The blood would not come off, no matter how hard Ophelia Carson scrubbed, and the December cold of Sierra City, California, made her fingers ache as she knelt in the creek at midnight in 1878. Her sleeves pushed up past her elbows, her skin raw and bleeding from her own frantic efforts. She could still smell the gunpowder, still see the flash of violence that had erupted in the saloon when 3 drifters had tried to rob the place where she worked serving drinks, and one of them had grabbed her, used her as a shield, and when Marshal Thompson fired, the blood had sprayed across her arms, her dress, her face. The drifter had fallen dead at her feet, and even though everyone told her it was not her fault, that she had done nothing wrong, she could not stop feeling his blood on her skin, could not stop trying to wash away the memory of his final breath against her neck. The water ran dark around her hands, though she knew it was only shadows and moonlight, knew the blood had washed away hours ago when she had scrubbed herself in the basin at the boarding house, until Mrs. Henderson had knocked on her door and asked if she was all right. She had lied and said yes, had waited until the house grew quiet, and then she had slipped out into the night wearing only her thin cotton dress, desperate for the rushing water of the creek to cleanse her, to make her feel clean again, to somehow wash away the violence that had erupted into her ordinary life. She did not hear the footsteps approaching through the grass until a voice spoke from behind her, low and careful, like someone trying not to startle a wild animal. "Miss, you are going to catch your death out here." Ophelia jerked around, her heart hammering, water dripping from her arms. A man stood 6 feet away, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat and holding his hands up slightly to show he meant no harm. Even in the moonlight she could see the concern in his face, the way his dark eyes took in her wet dress, her trembling form, the raw skin of her forearms. "I am fine," she said, but her voice shook and gave lie to her words. "Please just leave me alone." "I cannot do that," he said gently. He shrugged off his coat and then the thick wool blanket he had been carrying over his shoulder, stepping closer slowly. "I was checking my traps upstream when I heard splashing. Thought maybe a deer had gotten itself stuck in the current. I said I am fine." But her teeth were chattering now, the adrenaline that had been keeping her warm fading away, leaving only the brutal cold of the December night and the icy mountain water. He moved closer still, and now she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days of stubble on his strong jaw. His eyes were kind despite the wariness in them, and when he draped the blanket around her shoulders, his movements were careful, respectful, as though he were handling something precious and breakable. "My name is Wyatt Irons," he said quietly. "I work the cattle ranch about 3 miles north of town. I know what happened at the saloon tonight. Half the town knows. You are Ophelia Carson, the girl who got caught in the middle of it." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, feeling the warmth of it seeping into her frozen skin. "How do you know my name? I have seen you around town. You work at the Golden Bell, serving drinks." He paused, then added, "You always have a kind word for everyone, even the old prospectors who smell like they have not bathed in a month." Despite everything, despite the horror of the night and the cold and the rawness of her skin, Ophelia felt the tiniest hint of a smile touch her lips. "They tip better when you are nice to them." "That may be true." Wyatt gestured toward the creek bank. "Will you come out of the water now? Your lips are turning blue, and I would hate to have to explain to Marshal Thompson why I let you freeze to death when I could have prevented it." She hesitated, then nodded, letting him take her elbow and help her climb out of the creek. Her legs were so numb she stumbled, and his arm went around her waist to steady her, strong and sure. He guided her to a flat rock and helped her sit down, then knelt in front of her and began unlacing her soaked boots with efficient movements. "What are you doing?" she asked, pulling back slightly. "Getting these wet things off you before you lose your toes to frostbite. I have seen it happen to cowboys who fell in the river during winter roundup. It is not pretty." He pulled off her boots and then, with careful propriety, removed her stockings, his touch clinical and impersonal. Then he wrapped the lower half of the blanket around her feet and legs. "Better, yes." She looked down at her hands, at her arms in the moonlight. The skin was angry and red, scraped raw in places where she had used her fingernails more than the water. "I could not get it off. The blood. I could not get it off." "There is no blood on you now," Wyatt said gently. "There has not been for hours, I would wager." I know that, but I can still feel it. I can still smell it." Her voice broke, and suddenly tears were streaming down her face, hot against her cold cheeks. "He died right in front of me. I felt him die. And I know it was not my fault. Everyone keeps saying it was not my fault. But I keep thinking that if I had just moved faster, if I had just done something different, maybe he would not have grabbed me. Maybe the marshal would not have had to shoot. Maybe that man would still be alive even if he was a criminal and he was trying to rob us." Wyatt was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with an emotion she could not quite identify. "6 months ago, I shot a man. He was stealing cattle from our herd, and when I confronted him, he drew on me. I was faster. He died in the dirt with his horse standing over him, and I had to ride back to his camp and tell his partner what had happened. Found out later he had a wife and 2 kids back in Missouri, that he was stealing because they were starving and he could not find work." He met her eyes. "I did what I had to do. The law said I was right, but I still see his face sometimes when I close my eyes. I still wonder if I could have done something different." "How do you bear it?" Ophelia whispered. "I remind myself that I cannot change the past. I can only move forward and try to do better, try to be better. And I remind myself that carrying guilt for something that was not my fault helps no one, least of all the person who died." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, he gently took one of her hands in his, turning it palm up to examine her raw forearm. "You have hurt yourself badly here. Do you have any salve at your boarding house? I think Mrs. Henderson keeps some in the kitchen." "Good. I am going to walk you back there, and you are going to put salve on these scrapes and get into warm, dry clothes. And tomorrow, if you will let me, I will come by and check on you, make sure you are healing up properly." "Why would you do that? You do not know me. I know enough." He stood and offered her his hand. "I know you are the kind of person who says thank you to the Chinese laundry workers when most folks in this town treat them like they are invisible. I know you slipped bread to that half-starved dog that was hanging around behind the mercantile last week. And I know you have been through something terrible tonight, and you should not have to go through the aftermath alone." Ophelia took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. The blanket was still wrapped around her, heavy and warm, smelling faintly of horses and hay and wood smoke. "I do not even know you. Then let me change that." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer, more open. "Let me walk you home, Miss Carson. Let me make sure you are safe. And tomorrow, if you are willing, let me take you to lunch at the hotel restaurant and we can get to know each other properly." She should have said no. She should have been suspicious of this stranger appearing out of the darkness, of his kindness that seemed too good to be true. But there was something in his eyes, something steady and honest that made her believe he meant every word he said. "All right," she said softly. "All right." The walk back to the boarding house took 20 minutes, and Wyatt kept his arm around her shoulders the entire time, steadying her when she stumbled on the uneven ground, keeping her warm with his body heat and the blanket. He did not try to fill the silence with empty chatter, seemed to understand that she needed quiet to process everything that had happened. When they reached Mrs. Henderson's boarding house on the east side of town, he waited while she found the spare key hidden under the porch step, then followed her inside only long enough to make sure she could navigate the dark hallway to her room. "I will bring the blanket back tomorrow," she whispered, conscious of the other boarders sleeping behind closed doors. "Keep it for tonight. You need it more than I do." He paused at the door, silhouetted against the moonlight. "Get some rest, Miss Carson. Things will look better in the morning." "Ophelia," she said impulsively. "You can call me Ophelia." His smile was visible even in the darkness. "Wyatt, just Wyatt, not Mr. Irons. Thank you, Wyatt, for everything." "No thanks needed." He tipped his hat to her, a gesture that seemed old-fashioned and courtly, then stepped out into the night, pulling the door closed softly behind him. Ophelia stood in the hallway for a long moment, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, feeling something warm unfurling in her chest that had nothing to do with wool and everything to do with the kindness of a stranger who had found her at her lowest moment and offered help without expecting anything in return. She went to her room and lit the lamp with shaking hands, then stripped out of her wet dress and undergarments and dried herself with a towel. Her arms looked worse in the lamplight, the skin scraped and bleeding in places, and she winced as she applied the salve she found in her small medical kit. She dressed in her warmest nightgown and wool stockings, then climbed into bed with Wyatt's blanket wrapped around her like a cocoon. For the first time since the shooting, she felt like she might be able to sleep. She woke late the next morning to bright sunlight streaming through her window and Mrs. Henderson knocking on her door. "Miss Carson, there is a gentleman here to see you. Says his name is Wyatt Irons and he is expected." Ophelia sat up, her heart jumping. She had half convinced herself that last night had been a strange dream, that she had imagined the cowboy by the creek and his offer to take her to lunch. She looked down at the blanket still tangled around her legs, at the salve tin sitting on her bedside table, and realized it had all been real. "Tell him I will be down in 15 minutes, she called through the door. She dressed quickly in her best day dress, a dark blue wool with modest buttons up the front, and pinned her blonde hair into a neat bun. Her arms still ached, but the salve had helped, and when she rolled down her sleeves, the fabric hid the worst of the damage. She studied herself in the small mirror above her wash basin and saw that the shadows under her green eyes were darker than usual, but otherwise, she looked presentable. Wyatt was waiting in Mrs. Henderson's parlor, hat in his hands, looking scrubbed and neat in clean trousers and a pressed shirt. He stood when she entered, and his face brightened with a smile that made her pulse quicken. "Good morning, Ophelia. I hope I did not come by too early." "Not at all. I overslept, actually. I do not usually sleep past 8. She glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner and saw it was nearly 11. "After the night you had, I would say you earned the rest." He offered her his arm. "Shall we?" I took the liberty of making a reservation at the Sierra Hotel restaurant. They serve a fine roast chicken on Sundays. "It is Sunday." She had lost track of the days entirely. "It is." "Which means you do not have to work at the Golden Bell tonight, and I do not have to be back at the ranch until tomorrow morning. We have the whole day if you will spend it with me." She should have been cautious. She should have remembered that she barely knew this man, that for all his kindness last night, he was still a stranger. But when she looked into his dark eyes and saw the genuine warmth there, the honest hope that she would say yes, caution seemed less important than the feeling blooming in her chest. "I would like that very much," she said, taking his arm. The Sierra Hotel was the finest establishment in town. A three-story building with a restaurant that served meals on real china plates with silver cutlery. Ophelia had walked past it 100 times but had never been inside, and she felt self-conscious as Wyatt led her through the door and the maître showed them to a table by the window overlooking Main Street. "I cannot afford this," she whispered as Wyatt held out her chair. "You are not paying. I invited you, which makes this my treat." He sat across from her and opened his menu. "Order whatever you like. The chicken is excellent, but so is the pot roast." They ordered, and while they waited for the food to arrive, they talked. Wyatt told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about coming to California 3 years ago when his father died and left him a small inheritance. He had used the money to buy into a partnership at the Double Bar Ranch north of Sierra City, and he spent his days working cattle and his nights reading whatever books he could get his hands on. "I always wanted to see more of the world," he admitted, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "But the more I travel, the more I realize that what I really want is a place to call home, somewhere to put down roots. The Double Bar is starting to feel like that place." Ophelia told him about her own past, about growing up in a small farming community in Missouri, about her parents dying of cholera when she was 16, about making her way west with a family friend who had promised to look after her but had died of a heart attack in Nevada, leaving her alone and nearly penniless. She had made it to Sierra City on the last of her money, and had found work at the Golden Bell, which was not the most respectable establishment but was not the worst either, and she had been saving every penny she could, hoping to eventually buy a little house of her own. "I want a place that is mine," she said softly, "a place where I feel safe, where I can lock the door and know that nothing bad can get in. After last night, I imagine safety feels pretty important. It always has been, but last night made it more real somehow." She looked down at her plate, pushing her chicken around with her fork. "I keep thinking about what you said, about not being able to change the past. I want to believe that, but it is hard." "I know." Wyatt reached across the table and covered her hand with his, a gesture that felt both intimate and comforting. "But I also know that you are stronger than you think. You survived something terrible and you are still here, still moving forward. That takes courage. I do not feel very courageous." "Courage is not about feeling fearless. It is about being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. You were afraid last night, but you got up and went to the creek because you needed to. You let me help you even though you did not know me. You showed up here today even though it would have been easier to stay in your room and hide from the world. That is courage." She looked up at him, at the sincerity in his face, and felt something shift inside her. This man who barely knew her saw something in her that she had not seen in herself, and his belief made her want to be the person he seemed to think she was. They finished their meal and walked through town, and Wyatt pointed out places he thought she might like to visit. The new library that had just opened on 3rd Street, the bakery run by a French couple who made pastries that tasted like heaven, the little park by the church where wildflowers grew in the spring. He talked about the town like he loved it, like he had found something here worth staying for. And Ophelia found herself seeing Sierra City through his eyes, seeing possibility instead of just a place to survive. As the afternoon shadows grew long, they walked back toward Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, and Ophelia realized with surprise that she did not want the day to end. She had laughed more in the past few hours than she had in months, had felt lighter, more herself, than she had since arriving in California. "I should let you get inside," Wyatt said when they reached the front steps, "but I would very much like to see you again if you are willing." "I would like that too. How about Tuesday evening? I could pick you up after you finish work and we could take a walk, maybe get some supper at the cafe." "That sounds perfect." He smiled, and then, with a gentleness that made her breath catch, he lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Until Tuesday, then." She watched him walk away, her heart beating fast, her hand tingling where his lips had touched. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something new and terrifying and wonderful, and for the first time since the shooting, she felt hope. The next 2 days passed slowly. Ophelia returned to work at the Golden Bell, and while some of the patrons stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and pity, most treated her the same as always. Marshall Thompson stopped by to ask how she was doing, and she told him honestly that she was managing, that she was healing. She did not mention Wyatt, did not mention the way her thoughts kept drifting to him at odd moments, the way she found herself counting down the hours until Tuesday evening. When Tuesday finally arrived, she changed into her second-best dress, a green wool that matched her eyes, and waited on the boarding house porch. Wyatt arrived right on time, leading a beautiful bay mare with a white star on her forehead. "I thought we could ride out to the bluffs overlooking the valley," he said. "The sunset is spectacular from up there and it is a clear night, but if you would rather stay in town, that is fine too. The bluffs sound wonderful." She had not been on a horse in months, not since she had sold her own mount to pay for food and lodging when she first arrived in Sierra City, and she missed the freedom of riding. Wyatt helped her into the saddle, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. She could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, could smell the clean scent of soap and leather, and she felt safe in a way she had not felt in a long time. They rode out of town and up the winding trail to the bluffs, and Wyatt was right. The view was spectacular. The valley spread out below them, painted gold and orange by the setting sun, and the air was crisp and cold and so clear she felt like she could see forever. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "It is." But when she glanced back at him, he was not looking at the sunset. He was looking at her. They sat on a flat rock and watched the sun sink below the horizon, and Wyatt told her stories about his work at the ranch, about the ornery bull that kept breaking through fences, and the new foal that had been born last week. She told him about the regulars at the Golden Bell, about the prospector who claimed he had struck gold but always paid for his drinks in small silver coins, about the piano player who could play any song after hearing it just once. As the stars began to appear overhead, Wyatt said quietly, "I want to be honest with you about something. All right. I did not just happen upon you at the creek that night. I mean, I was checking my traps, that part is true. But when I heard splashing and went to investigate, I could have just left when I saw it was a person and not an animal. I could have minded my own business and gone on my way. But I recognized you, even in the moonlight, and I could see that you were in distress, and I could not just leave you there." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I have noticed you for months, Ophelia. Every time I come to town, I find myself hoping I will see you. And when I heard what happened at the saloon, I was sick with worry. So when I found you at the creek, it felt like fate was giving me a chance to finally talk to you, to let you know that I exist." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Why did you not talk to me before? At the Golden Bell or on the street? Because you always looked like you were just trying to get through the day, like you had built walls around yourself to keep the world out. I did not want to be just another man bothering you, another person you had to be polite to while secretly wishing he would leave you alone." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "But that night, you needed help. You needed someone, and I could not walk away from that." "I am glad you did not." The words came out barely above a whisper. "I am glad you were there. So am I." He lifted her hand to his lips again, but this time the kiss lingered, warm and gentle. "I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other. but I feel something when I am with you, Ophelia, something I have never felt before, and I want to see where it goes if you will let me." "I feel it too," she admitted. "It scares me how much I feel it. I have only known you for a few days, but when I am with you, I feel like I can breathe again. Like maybe the world is not as dark and dangerous as I thought it was." "The world is plenty dark and dangerous," Wyatt said with a rueful smile, "but maybe it is a little less so when you have someone by your side." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, his lips brushed against hers in a kiss that was soft and questioning and full of promise. She kissed him back, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart beating as fast as her own. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I should get you back to town before Mrs. Henderson sends out a search party," Wyatt said, probably wise. "She is very protective of her boarders." They rode back in comfortable silence, and when Wyatt helped her down from the horse, he pulled her close for one more kiss, longer and deeper than the first, a kiss that made her knees weak and her head spin. "Can I see you again on Thursday?" he asked against her lips. "Yes. Yes, you can see me every day if you want to. Careful. I might take you up on that." Over the following weeks, they fell into a pattern. Wyatt came to town every other day, timing his visits for when Ophelia finished work, and they would walk or ride or simply sit and talk for hours. He brought her books from his small collection, knowing she loved to read, and she made him sandwiches from the kitchen at the Golden Bell, knowing he often forgot to eat when he was busy with ranch work. They went to church together on Sundays, and Mrs. Henderson started setting an extra place at her table for Wyatt when he stopped by, clearly approving of the serious young cowboy who was courting her boarder. Christmas came, and Wyatt gave Ophelia a beautiful pair of leather gloves lined with soft wool, perfect for the cold California winter. She gave him a book of poetry she had saved up to buy from the mercantile, and the look on his face when he opened it made her feel like she had given him something priceless. They spent Christmas evening at the ranch, and Wyatt introduced her to his partner, an older rancher named Bill Crawford, who looked at them with knowing eyes and told Ophelia that Wyatt had not stopped talking about her since the night at the creek. "He is a good man," Bill said when Wyatt was out of earshot checking on the horses. "Best ranch hand I have ever worked with, and honest as the day is long. You could do a lot worse." "I know," Ophelia said softly. "I feel very lucky." "He is the lucky one," Bill corrected. "Any fool can see that." As winter turned toward spring, Ophelia felt herself healing in ways that had nothing to do with the physical scars on her arms, which had faded to thin white lines. The nightmares about the shooting came less frequently, and when they did, she would lie awake and think about Wyatt, about his steady presence and his kind eyes, and the way he made her feel safe. She found herself imagining a future with him, a little house on the ranch, children running through the fields, a life built on love and trust and partnership. She knew he was imagining the same things. She could see it in the way he looked at her, in the way he talked about plans for expanding the ranch, in the way he asked her opinion on everything from which breed of cattle was best to whether he should plant an orchard on the south pasture. In March, when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom in the park by the church, Wyatt took her on a picnic. They spread a blanket under an oak tree, and he unpacked a basket full of food that he admitted Mrs. Henderson had helped him prepare. They ate and laughed and kissed, and when the sun was high overhead, Wyatt took both of her hands in his and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Ophelia, I have been thinking about how to do this for weeks. I have rehearsed speeches in my head, tried to come up with the perfect words, but the truth is there are no perfect words. There is just the truth." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I have loved you since the night I found you at the creek, maybe even before that. You are the strongest, kindest, most beautiful person I have ever known, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. So I am asking, will you marry me? Will you come to the ranch and help me build a life there? Will you let me spend every day for the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me? Tears were streaming down Ophelia's face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. Yes, yes, of course I will marry you. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and she kissed him back with all the love and hope and gratitude she felt, with all the dreams she had for their future. When they finally broke apart, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band with a small diamond set in the center. "It was my mother's," he said, slipping it onto her finger. "My father gave it to me before he died and told me to give it to the woman I loved. I think my mother would have liked you very much. I wish I could have met her. Me too. But she would be happy knowing that I found you, that I found someone who makes me want to be better, do better." They set the wedding date for June, giving them time to prepare and save money. Ophelia gave notice at the Golden Bell, and the owner, a gruff man named Patterson, surprised her by giving her a bonus and saying she had been one of his best workers. She used the money to buy fabric for a wedding dress, and Mrs. Henderson helped her sew it, the two of them working together in the evenings while Wyatt was at the ranch. Bill Crawford offered them the use of a small cabin on the ranch property, a two-room structure that needed work but had good bones. Wyatt spent his spare time fixing it up, replacing the roof and patching the walls and building new furniture. Ophelia came out on weekends to help, painting the walls a cheerful yellow and sewing curtains for the windows. And slowly, the cabin transformed from a rundown shack into a cozy home. The wedding was simple and beautiful. They were married in the church on a sunny June morning, with Mrs. Henderson and Bill Crawford as witnesses, and half the town in attendance. Ophelia wore her white dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers, and Wyatt wore his best suit and looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Wyatt kissed her with such tenderness and love that Ophelia felt her heart might burst from happiness. This was what she had been searching for all along, she realized. Not just safety or a home, but love. Real, deep, abiding love with someone who saw her, truly saw her, and loved her anyway. The reception was held at the hotel restaurant with food and dancing and more laughter than Ophelia had heard in years. Bill made a toast that had everyone wiping their eyes, talking about how Wyatt had been alone for too long and how Ophelia had brought light back into his life. Mrs. Henderson gave Ophelia a quilt she had made, stitched with a pattern of stars, and told her to fill her new home with love and babies and joy. As the sun set, Wyatt and Ophelia rode back to the ranch together, and when they reached the cabin, he carried her over the threshold like she weighed nothing. He set her down gently in the middle of the front room, and they stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, taking in the reality that they were married, that this was their home, that their life together was truly beginning. "I love you," Wyatt said, pulling her close. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Ophelia whispered. "Thank you for finding me that night. Thank you for not walking away. I could never have walked away from you." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You are everything to me." They made love that night with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless. And afterward, they lay tangled together in their new bed, talking about their dreams for the future. Wyatt wanted to expand the herd, maybe buy out Bill's share of the ranch when the older man was ready to retire. Ophelia wanted to start a garden, maybe raise chickens, possibly take in sewing work to bring in extra money. They both wanted children, a house full of them, with Wyatt's dark eyes and Ophelia's blonde hair. The first year of their marriage was hard work but deeply satisfying. They woke before dawn and went to bed exhausted, their days filled with the endless tasks of ranch life. But they did it together, side by side, and that made all the difference. Ophelia learned to ride herd and mend fences and help with the branding, and Wyatt learned to cook simple meals and do laundry and appreciate the small touches that made their cabin feel like a home. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, and Wyatt would read aloud from whatever book they were working through, his deep voice soothing and familiar. Ophelia would lean against his shoulder and feel a contentment so complete it was almost overwhelming. This was what happiness felt like, she realized. Not a grand gesture or a dramatic moment, but the quiet accumulation of ordinary days lived with someone you loved. In their second year of marriage, Ophelia discovered she was pregnant. She told Wyatt one evening in October, and the look of pure joy on his face made her cry happy tears. He pulled her into his arms and held her so carefully, like she was made of glass, and whispered that he was going to be the best father he could be, that their child would grow up loved and safe and wanted. The pregnancy was not easy. Ophelia was sick for the first few months, and the winter was harsh, with heavy snows that kept them confined to the cabin for days at a time. But Wyatt was patient and attentive, bringing her tea and crackers when she felt nauseated, reading to her when she was too tired to do anything but rest, holding her when she cried from hormones and fear, and the overwhelming enormity of becoming a mother. Their son was born on a warm May evening in 1880, delivered by the midwife from town with Wyatt holding Ophelia's hand through every contraction. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Wyatt cut the cord with shaking hands and then cradled his son against his chest with such reverence that Ophelia fell in love with him all over again. They named the baby William, after Bill Crawford, who had become like family to them. Little William had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and from the moment he was born, he was the center of their world. Wyatt would come in from the fields and go straight to the cradle, picking up his son and talking to him in a soft voice about everything and nothing. Ophelia would nurse the baby while sitting in the rocking chair Wyatt had built, singing lullabies her own mother had sung to her, and feel a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. As William grew from a baby into a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Wyatt bought out Bill's share when the older man decided to retire to San Francisco to live with his daughter, and suddenly, the Double Bar Ranch was entirely theirs. It was a huge responsibility, but also an incredible opportunity, and they threw themselves into making the ranch successful. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, and Ophelia managed the books and the household while also caring for William, who was a rambunctious child full of energy and curiosity. When William was 3, Ophelia became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1883, a tiny thing with blonde hair and her father's dark eyes. They named her Margaret, after Wyatt's mother, and she was as calm and content as William had been fussy and demanding. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch thrived, the children grew, and Wyatt and Ophelia grew deeper in love with each passing year. They had their challenges, of course. There were droughts that threatened the herd, illnesses that swept through the cattle, financial worries that kept them up at night. But they faced everything together, and that made even the hardest times bearable. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wyatt took Ophelia back to the Bluffs where he had first told her he loved her. The children were staying with Mrs. Henderson, who adored them and spoiled them shamelessly, and it was just the 2 of them, like it had been in the beginning. They sat on the same flat rock and watched the sunset, and Wyatt pulled Ophelia close and said, "Do you remember what I told you that night? That I felt something when I was with you, something I had never felt before. I remember. That feeling has only grown stronger. Every day I wake up and see your face, every night I fall asleep with you in my arms, I feel grateful. Grateful that I found you at the creek that night. Grateful that you gave me a chance. Grateful for the life we have built together." Ophelia turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "I am the one who should be grateful. You saved me, Wyatt, not just that night but every day since. You showed me what love really means. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to believe in happy endings." "We saved each other," Wyatt said, kissing her softly. "And we will keep saving each other every day for the rest of our lives." Years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. William grew into a serious, responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. And Margaret became a talented artist who filled the cabin with drawings and paintings. Ophelia and Wyatt grew older, their hair turning gray, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and long years, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, becoming something rich and complex and unshakable. When Wyatt was 55 and Ophelia was 52, they sat on the porch of their cabin on a summer evening and watched their grandchildren playing in the yard. William had married a lovely woman named Sarah, and they had 3 children of their own. Margaret had married a teacher from town, and they had twin boys who were as wild and energetic as their grandfather had been in his youth. "We did all right, did we not?" Wyatt said, reaching over to take Ophelia's hand. "We did better than all right. We did wonderful." She squeezed his fingers, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that was still there despite the years. "I still think about that night sometimes, the night you found me at the creek. So do I. Best night of my life, even though it was one of your worst." "It was not the best night," Ophelia corrected, "but it was the beginning of the best things. It was the night everything changed, the night I found you, the night we found each other." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the valley they had called home for so many years, listening to the laughter of their grandchildren, feeling the contentment that came from a life well lived and a love that had endured through everything. As the first stars appeared overhead, Wyatt pulled Ophelia close and kissed her temple, and she leaned into him with the ease of long familiarity. They had built something beautiful together, something that would last beyond their own lifetimes in the children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. The darkness that had haunted Ophelia that terrible night at the creek seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by the warmth and light of the life she had created with Wyatt. She had been broken, and he had helped her heal. She had been lost, and he had helped her find her way home. And together, they had built a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of kindness and courage and choosing to believe in second chances. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, passed down through generations who would hear the story of how their great-grandparents met on a cold December night, how a cowboy had wrapped a blanket around a woman scrubbing her arms raw in the creek, how that simple act of compassion had been the beginning of something extraordinary. It was a story about trauma and healing, about finding love in unexpected places, about the resilience of the human heart. But most of all, it was a story about 2 people who had found each other in the darkness and had chosen to walk toward the light together, hand in hand, for the rest of their days. And that, Ophelia thought as she sat on the porch with her husband's arm around her shoulders and her family's laughter filling the evening air, was the greatest love story of all.